Okay, yeah, good afternoon. Good afternoon. And I'm very happy to welcome you all at our unique event today. Yeah, and unique is not just a loud word, because today we have so many special things and, well, special guests, what is even more important. So as you must have noticed, today you could get access to our webinar through a virtual stand, which is organized by Delta Publishing. And well, we love running our seminars with Delta Publishing. And well, the guest speakers today, yeah, they're the authors of one best-selling book. So then what else makes it unique is that today you will have a chance to talk to Michelle Jagger. She is the ELT consultant of Delta Publishing. Yeah, and yeah, today we have two great speakers. So this is David Byrne and Mark Heffernan. Yeah, hello, hello.
Oh.
And they will share their brilliant ideas today with you. And well, I'm absolutely sure that you will have a lot of discoveries. And well, this term, textploitation, yeah, will be clear to you, and you will see, you will know, well, how to exploit texts. Yeah, and well, hopefully you will get a lot of creative ideas. So thank you, Mark and David, over to you.
Thank you, Galina. So hello, everyone. Yeah, we're going to talk to you briefly about how to kind of fully exploit a text, and a little bit about me first. My name is Mark Heffernan. I've been teaching for 17, nearly 18 years, and I teach at Queen Mary University of London, teaching a little bit on the MA program there, and also teaching on sessional programs, and also developing materials for them. David?
My name's David. I've been teaching I've been in the industry for, I don't know, about 12 or 13 years now, I think. And I work at EC, which is where I met Mark. And I've done, I think, every academic job EC has to offer, from teacher through to director of studies. And now I am curriculum manager and regional academic director for Europe and South Africa. So kind of done a little bit of everything. And I think all of our experience, all of the, the things we've learned together, the places we've taught, have kind of helped to shape textploitation and what it is. So just to give you an idea of what we're going to talk about today, we are going to look at textploitation. We're going to talk about how it began and look at kind of the 4 cornerstones that we've gradually distilled it down to over the years. We will talk a little bit about how texts, specifically articles, are usually used in the classroom, presented in course books and things like that. And then we'll take an article and we'll talk about how we mined it further, how we sort of took it to the next steps. And as we go along the way, we'll share some tips and ideas for exploiting articles, also that you can more fully exploit your articles in your lessons.
Precisely as Galina said.
Yes, so that's the plan. To tell you a little bit about it, Textploitation started, as I said, myself and Mark, we were teachers at EC, and we, as all good things, it started in a pub in central London near Oxford Street, where we met for a drink, and I had a lesson I was working on, and I shared it with Mark, and he had some lovely ideas. We could do this, we could do this, we could do this. And it all kind of was born from a frustration we realized we both had. And this was a frustration we had as teachers and then as managers as well. And it was seeing teachers having to create photocopy after photocopy after photocopy. So they had their course book, they had their main lesson, but on top of that, I need a grammar photocopy, I need a vocabulary photocopy, I need a speaking photocopy, and then just these reams of papers going into class, some of which never got touched, but many of which were not very connected. Maybe it was linked to a grammar point or a vocabulary point, or maybe it was linked to a topic, but it didn't seem like there was a cohesive thread throughout the lesson. It was, here's another thing, here's another thing, here's another thing. And on top of that, just destroying rainforests. So that was our kind of shared frustration, and it's through that Textploitation was born. We started a blog to sort of test out ideas, and we put our lessons out there. We got feedback from a lot of our co-teachers and from comments on the blog, and that helped us to kind of shape Textploitation into what it is today. And that's what we put into our book.
I think it's also important to say that when we first started, we were looking very much at these Textploitation as kind of extension activities and doing more. And I think as we've gone on, it has become much more about, yes, the systems and the skills, but we focused a lot more on skills and micro skills, I think. And we're going to be looking at some of that today. Yeah,
and so to kind of highlight what Textploitation is, we've got our 4 main cornerstones. Textploitation, it has a general assumption there is more to be exploited in any text than we generally look at in the industry. And that sort of underpins everything we do. We suggest a little and often approach. And I think this is key. A lesson, it doesn't have to be 3 hours on a single skill. We like to look at what is in the text, take little bits and look at them often, so the students are gradually seeing similar skills and similar language chunks, language points being used in different texts. So you'll see in our book, and you'll see what we do today, there's a lot of sort of short activities drawing from the text. We believe that a text can be used to teach both systems and skills. And I think very often you find texts are vehicles for systems. I mean, grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation. That's kind of what you see, and we believe that there's more to be done. And we encourage an overt approach to teaching. Now, just to kind of define what we mean by that, we mean bringing the learners into the learning discussion a little bit more. So talking to them about what we're doing and why we're doing it. Because if we're not doing that, then we're not preparing them to engage with text outside the classroom. And that's what this is all about. It's great to bring in a text, but if we're not bridging the gap between the classroom and the real world, then what are we really preparing our students for? So those are the kind of 4 main cornerstones, and you'll see them throughout our talk. Anything to add to that, Mark?
No, I mean, I think what I would add is this idea as well. When we're talking about skills, very often we're not looking at skills being tested being taught in most existing materials. They're very often being tested, occasionally practiced. So by this overt approach of involving students in kind of conversation, and we're not talking here about negotiated syllabus, which was very big when I started teaching. And I'm not sure it ever went anywhere really, other than the students felt a sense of agency. I think what we're trying to do here with this overt approach is almost open the door on what we know we are doing. And I think for too long there's been this idea that we must kind of hoard our knowledge and keep it secret so that we appear kind of magicians as teachers. And we don't believe that. We genuinely think the best way to get students to understand the things like skills work that we do is to kind of involve them in that discussion and to show why we're doing things, what it will enable them to do, and hopefully after a few times be able to elicit all of those things from them.
Brilliant. So let's start with you guys, right? So in the chat window, we want to hear what you already do with your articles in your classes. Is there any nice activities you like to do, anything special? So if you could write in the chat window, what you do with articles. And I should say, while you guys are writing, feel free to start. But when we talk about articles, we're talking about, sure, of course, your standard newspaper articles, but it could also be, a blog. It could be kind of reviews and things like that you find online and in magazines. It could be online article, could be, a print article. So it's quite
anything in a journalistic style, effectively.
Yeah. So guys, feel free to pop any answers in there and we will have a look and see what you do. Oh, scientific articles. Yeah, I think, Alexandra, you see, vocabulary is very often they're a vehicle for vocabulary very often. Oh, paraphrasing.
Paraphrasing and make students retell, same thing. Vocab notes, interesting to see what those notes would be.
I really like this idea of making students retell and paraphrasing, because one of the things,
skill.
Yes, that is a skill, but it's also, it's what we do in real life. And I find so often in classes that the article isn't engaged with in a meaningful way, not in the way we do in the real world. In the real world, we read an article and then we say, hey, did you see that article in blah, blah, blah newspaper? And you summarize it. So that's really nice.
Working with chunks, a bit of lexical approach coming in.
I do love chunks. I like the idea of translation. I think when you have that monolingual group, it's a real advantage.
Valuable tool. It was very out of fashion when I started teaching, and thankfully it's not anymore.
Yeah. Lovely. I like a little bit of collocations in there. Good day, everyone. Hello, Paulina. No worries. Welcome.
Don't worry. You're here.
So, I mean, there's some lovely ideas in there, and I really like that paraphrasing and retelling came up again and again. But I think, ask students to create exercises for each other. Always a fun one, especially with those exam classes and things like that.
And we'll be coming maybe to something that you can do to perhaps make those more effective, because I've done activities like that multiple times, and there's almost always at least one group who don't make particularly good activities. And so how can we maybe help direct them? Some ideas for that perhaps coming up later.
All right, so some lovely ideas there. Hopefully some that we can expand on and some that we can add to. I think, Mark, do you want to kind of tell us a little bit about how our articles are presented in course books?
So I think most of us have used articles in course books. I would expect if you've used a course book, you've seen articles. And I think one of the first things to say is we are not against course books. I think if you're expecting teachers to teach, course books are an incredibly valuable tool. They give structure. They have a degree of kind of quality checking having gone into them, so that they're a good resource. Our problem, I suppose, with them is that we think a lot gets left undone. So they often have these fantastic, rich, interesting texts. They're normally chosen for good reasons. Writers don't choose, bad texts and stick them into a course book. Where we perhaps take issue with them is this rare link to the student's real world. So when we're looking at course books being used in, text being used in course books, what we're quite often finding is that they're being asked to do things like gist questions, and gist questions are fine, but the way that they're posed often isn't realistic. So, I think we've all seen those exercises where in line 12, the writer says this. What does that mean? No one has ever asked me about a book, film, or an article and said, oh, what was it about? And gone, in line 12, what did it say? And so this is what we like to try and develop, something that relates. And that's why David, I think, picked up on that kind of love of paraphrase and translation, because that's what we do. That's what we do naturally. When we read, we tell someone else about it. We put it into our own words. So it's a good, realistic skill to have. I think the final stage of most articles, lessons in course books tends to be as a vehicle for a discussion on a topic. Nothing wrong with that. But our issue here links to this skills use. So skills in books, as I said earlier, are tested rather than taught. Occasionally they're practiced. So it's probably important to define what I mean by these terms. If you are testing a skill, all you are doing is seeing if they can do it or if they can't. And very often, I think this has been an issue with language teaching for a long time, that we sort of say, well, do more practice, as if that is going to magically fill the gap. And I think particularly around the upper int levels, there's those students who seem to have hit kind of a wall. So perhaps what they need rather than more practice is actually a little bit more teaching and development. And we're going to look at how we can do that, because I think course books very often don't do this. They often do have some skills, and occasionally They'll have some development work in there, but they're often, as we'll see in the next slide, things that get kind of omitted. So we're going to be looking at kind of how we can perhaps teach skills rather than just merely test or practice them. And then from that, have discussions about the skills themselves, not just the topic.
I think that's important. You know, there's a very popular course book that's come out. I said it's just come out. It came out about, I think, 2 years ago or a year ago, and it's one of its things is it has skills development lessons for every single unit. You know, reading, writing, everything, and it's just as Mark said. You know, the final discussion is about the topic. It has nothing to do with the skill. If we're not having an overt approach to teaching skills, if we're not bringing it in as a discussion, if we're not helping people see how they can apply this outside the classroom, it's not a skills development lesson. It's not meeting its objective. So we're going to try and look at how you can do that.
And I think it's worth saying at this point that even the reading skills that students know the names of, things like skimming and scanning, very often they are experts at it in their own language, but they don't take it with them, or a lot of students don't take it with them when they're learning a foreign language. Mm-hmm. And interestingly, when they're outside of the classroom, they probably do this to a degree, because I don't think anyone stands in an airport and reads every single name of every flight before they get on a plane for fun. Everyone just looks for the word they're looking for and scans for it. However, when we give them a text in something like an IELTS class, that doesn't necessarily happen. I've just been told my connection is unstable, so I hope you can hear me still.
We can see you again. You're good to go.
Marvelous. Okay. So here we've got a text, okay, and we're going to have a little bit of a look at what we've just sort of said. So normally in a classic course book, we're going to get something to kind of activate the schemata at the beginning, to get them thinking about the topic. Okay, and then we're going to get a prediction activity. So what do you think it's going to say? We might put the title on the board and see where we go from there. However, from my experience of observing teachers over very many years, these two are the two parts of the lesson that are supposed to be developing skills, and they get dropped almost immediately when time pressure comes on. No one ever wants to drop the vocab because students see the value of vocab. No one ever wants to drop the discussion at the end because it's a nice rounded bit, but occasionally that'll be the bit that gets done, that gets dropped as well. But these two middle parts, the comprehension questions, which very often don't mirror the real world. So in terms of how useful they are for the students outside of class, when we actually want them to use the language, may be of minimal use. And the vocab questions, which hopefully are good vocab questions and are developing useful language and perhaps even some skills, they get done. But these parts that bookend the lesson maybe are the ones that get dropped, and particularly this prediction skill. Why is prediction so useful? I can give you an example from yesterday. Yesterday I was teaching a group of doctors who are learning English so that they can become doctors in the UK. And in order to read something, we all predict. If you're doing genuine research at university level, you have to predict what's in an article from the title. We all do it all the time. We do it for pleasure when we're reading books. You know, oh, what's that going to be about? We always like to think ahead. Very often, students don't see the value of it. But I think my main argument for why it's so vital is if you have an idea what you're going to read, it's so much easier for you to read because you're reading to check if you're right, as opposed to kind of reading blind and just going into something. So I think it's important that these first two don't get dropped, but perhaps there's a lot more we can do as well.
I think so. This is the article we're going to choose. Now, guys, don't worry if you can't read it there. You don't need to read this. It is in the book if you do want to read it someday. And you know, these activities, we're not saying we don't do them. Yes, of course, we will include vocabulary. We will include comprehension checking and all of this. But we want to also take it further. And I think there's a point that someone made in the chat window saying sometimes students are reluctant to create exercises. And I think, yes, if you asked me to write comprehension questions about an article in a second language, I'm going to struggle to do that, because that is a skill that materials writers develop over many years. So I think I can understand why they're reluctant, because it's not real. It's not
and
a real
also
thing.
it's really, really difficult.
Yeah.
That could be another reason why we're not massive fans of writing.
They are true.
But yes, Paulina, absolutely. Prediction makes reading focused.
Yeah.
But students need to know that's why we're doing it, because otherwise it's, oh, we're talking about something. And when we did a talk on overt teaching, we did a little bit of research, and it was very quickly apparent that all the things that we took for granted as stages of a lesson that we do naturally as teachers, students don't get why we're doing them. Very often they just think it's either to fill time or brilliantly so that they can make friends with their neighbor. So we have to be a little bit overt about why we're doing these prediction activities. So I want you to talk to your partner about what you think is going to happen next. It's not about the talking. That's a nice byproduct, but it's not the focus of that exercise.
So let's look at how we could take this a little bit further, take it beyond the normal things we would see. So this is something we love to do. So just to see what this article is about Tim Berners-Lee, who created the internet, right? Real person, really interesting real life thing. And so one of the things we love to do is use what we have in the class. When we have phones, we have the access to the internet, we have so much more we can do. Very often articles tend to be on, depending on what you've chosen, but in course books, they tend to be real life things, you know, real life events or real issues in the world or real people, very often real interesting people. And that means, number one, other people will have written about them. And number two, you might have different opinions depending on who's written about them. And this means that by opening up, by allowing our students to go and to Google someone and find what they can, it opens up a few opportunities. Number one, it mirrors real life. That's what you do. When I'm reading an article and I see, who is this person they've mentioned? I'll very quickly Google them and it will inform my reading. So that is a real life skill we do. It might send us off down a click rabbit hole as we click another person, but we're there as teachers to keep our students out of that rabbit hole. This kind of activity really develops their independent research skills, which is you know, this is what we need. We need them interested and being able to access interesting content in the language they're learning.
It's English. An essential 21st century skill as well. I think it's important to kind of mention that, and it's going to be increasingly common in course books.
And this is something, this activity, I mean, we use this article at a higher level, but at a lower level, you can give students access to a more difficult article by asking them to Google in their L1. Give them a few minutes to check out in their L1 and get some background information on this, and then it'll be much more accessible to them. It's what we do. When I'm learning Spanish, I see something I don't understand, I Google a little bit in English, get a bit of background, in I go, I'm ready to go. This is also very, if you've seen the new CEF4 that they produced 2 years ago, I think, mediation is now a huge skill. And that's what this is. If you can read something in your L1 and explain it in your L2, that is a skill. So this tiny 5-minute activity, it's really developing a lot. And from a practical side, I have taught a lot of teenagers. I have taught a lot of people of all different ages. We're glued to our phones these days. If we ban them entirely from classes,
it just makes them want them more.
It makes them want it. They use it under the table. You know, it's just going to happen, especially if we're learning online. We're definitely under the table, off camera, using our phones. So by bringing them into your lesson, there's a side bonus of it gives them a little break, allows them to use it, and then they're back in the lesson. So these nice, just short activities that can engage them in the topic, give them access to a more difficult text, or develop these skills of mediation and independent research. So it's a nice little thing to do if it's a real person in the article.
This is a big thing for me, and obviously a lot of my teaching is based around university teaching, but I really like this activity of looking at cohesion, because very often when we're teaching writing, and I'm saying teaching, not testing here, but when we're teaching writing, we focus on improving the grammar. So actually what we're focusing on is not the skill of writing, we're focusing on the systems of language and grammar. And of course, they are essential to good English. But actually, one of the things that can lead students' work to fall down is a lack of cohesion, a lack of this stickiness. And students aren't going to pick this up always naturally. And particularly if you've taught IELTS, there's often a very all sort of conjunctions are equal approach to how they're done. And it doesn't necessarily reflect how skilled writers use conjunctions. They make a choice. There is a difference between although and however in terms of English usage. And a writer has made a choice to use the although concessional type clause or the straight shift between however. So I prefer to see these conjunction words viewed as signposts and directors to the reader, because when we skim read, we use these to help us navigate. And letting students know about this is really useful. Also, looking at how themes develop, the old theme and rhyme ideas, but also the sequencing of paragraphs. Paragraphs follow very tightly ordered structures. They're pretty predictable, and they're predictable, which is why when we tell students to skim, read the first paragraph, first sentence of the paragraph, read the last, read the first, read the last. You should be able to, from that, get a good idea if the article is reasonably well written. And so by looking at these things, but having the discussion about them, we can get this. And it doesn't have to be a huge lesson. Every time you notice a little trick happening with kind of a link, just point it out. Just ask them, what's this for? How does this relate to this? Why is this there? What does this it refer back to? These types of questions really help. Pronouns are crucially important. And most course books, if we're lucky, have one page of pronoun practice. They're not mentioned the rest of the time. So it's a really, really useful thing. Unless, of course, you've done Cambridge and the part 2 in the old use of English, which very often tested this, not so much these days. But I've been teaching for 17 years. The pre-2008 test, oh, that was pronoun-tastic. Anyway, David, give me my next point.
So one more, like, I think this is just the perfect example of kind of textploitation little and often, because I think in our industry, we're so, this is a writing lesson. This is a reading text. So we're going to do reading skills of skimming and scanning and things like that. Tiny, draw students' attention to it. This is a little writing skill, because any article, any text has been written and therefore displays writing skills. We don't need to be spending, as I said before, an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours on a writing lesson in order to raise awareness of writing skills.
Yep.
Do it often. And in the first time you do it, your students will say, I don't know why that's there. But gradually they will become quicker and better at analyzing the text. And it will bleed into their writing, it will bleed into their speaking.
And it will follow them outside of our classrooms, crucially.
And, you know, Mark kind of mentioned it, but we're talking about a register here as well. Like, you know, we're choosing articles, but I've also said articles, we're allowing it to include reviews and blogs and things like that. Linking words, signposting here, it won't always be the more formal ones just because it's an article. Depending on what it is, it will be more informal. And the number of times I've received a writing from a student riddled with ergo, thus, therefore, but it's supposed to be in a more informal style. So just little raising awareness. Why did the writer choose this? Asking that why question. Why did they do this? Will gradually train your learners to do it themselves. And then we're learning. When they can do it outside class time, that's the holy grail, the autonomous student, isn't it? This kind of this one is quite nice, and this is something you'll see throughout our articles, but all of our kind of textploitation lessons, is looking at opinion and trying to understand sort of writer bias and things like that. I think this critical thinking skill is huge. It's a 21st century skill. It's something we need to be developing in the current world, more so than ever, we are just bombarded by articles on different social media accounts, opinions. We need to be able to identify fact and opinion. So, I mean, in this article, we try and find where the writer presents Tim Berners-Lee's opinions, where the writer agrees or disagrees, and where they use facts. And again, it's this question, why? Why did the writer use them? Did that add to the article? How did it add to the article? And I think this mirrors how we engage with articles. We don't just respout the facts. We say, I read this interesting article. I didn't really agree with the writer, but I liked this fact that they came up with. This is my interpretation of it. But if our students aren't trained to identify fact and opinion, they don't stand a chance.
And you've already there, David, by your use of the word interesting article, given an opinion on it. And I think these are the things that get lost quite often. The value of these kind of adjectives. In an article that I saw in class yesterday, there was the statement, this suggests that. And obviously the use of suggests here means the writer has doubt, but students won't automatically know that unless we point it out. You know, we've got to be opening the door on these bits of language for them and saying, hey, look, did you notice this? It's really small, but it means something.
Little connotation that goes, it's the apparently, allegedly. The articles are riddled with these just really interesting telling adverbs and linking words that allow us to see what the writer thinks.
And so when people looked earlier, and there were lovely comments about things like collocation, the choice of words that collocate together very often is what's giving us that opinion. And also we need to go into that, as David just said, the connotational value of certain words, because again, I'm being harsh on IELTS here, but very often because of the IELTS marking system, I used to teach IELTS and IELTS is great, but because of the marking system that's used, you get just rewarded for using high level words, not necessarily in a value where the connotation is going to lead to kind of a cohesive total message. You can throw out however and although, and they can be the same. You can use things like therefore in a similar way to how you might use the result of this, and they're not really the same. And so these connotational values I think are crucial, because if we view these words as flat synonyms, we're missing part of the message, and more importantly, the students are possibly misrepresenting what they actually want to say. You know, we all know the difference, I think, between skinny and slim, but that sort of difference applies everywhere. I always sort of say synonyms are never really synonyms. They're Venn diagrams where in a couple of sort of places they may have similar usage, but they're not true synonyms. There are very few.
An interesting comment there asking about scientific articles. And obviously you would expect your scientific article to be maybe more fact-based and things like that. But again, this idea of just drawing attention to the function of a sentence, the function of a paragraph, I think is really, really valuable and important. So asking students, why did they organize the paragraph in this way? It's because they maybe made a point and now they're backing that up with research and examples. So I think there's still value to it. Just with these kinds of articles, there's more opinion than. And
also, I mean, most scientific articles, particularly journal articles, will end with a discussion section. So there's certainly opinion presented there. The choice of where they actually drew their research, that was a choice. That the narrowing down of focus, the scope that was chosen, all of those things were a critical choice. Yes, when we're looking at the methodology and the results, they are hopefully, sadly not always, but hopefully pure kind of solid fact, provided the researchers have got integrity. But, you know, there are always things like bias. Who commissioned it? What did they expect to find? Why did they omit that variable? All of those things form part of that type of scientific critical discussion, I think.
Yeah, and all of this is developing that critical thinking. One of the things we love to do with articles is, and it kind of goes back to what I said earlier about Googling, it's, I've presented this article, I now want you to find another article on the same topic in another publication, because what you'll find is that maybe one newspaper has interpreted it in one way and another newspaper has interpreted it in another way. The same facts can be interpreted and presented in very different ways. And I think that can be true for research as well. The same sort of research can be presented in different ways depending on what maybe someone's agenda was in looking at the research. So, reflection. Mark, talk to us about reflection.
I think reflection is very often talked about as if it's some sort of beautiful hippie skill. It's okay, now we're going to be calm and we're going to think. That's not what really we're talking about when we mean reflection. We're eliciting back from students why we did what we did. Again, for us, it's very much this link to getting students to think about why, the process of what we've been doing, and how it's going to help them outside the classroom. So I think we always look, what did we do? Why? Where are you going to use that in the future? It should have this kind of three-tiered timeline to it. If you ask students what we did today, and you've normally done a reading article, you're going to get, we looked at some vocab, we did some reading. They're not necessarily going to hone in on what skills we were looking to develop. And so we have to encourage them to see that actually, yes, today we did look at those things, but actually what we were really, the main focus was building this occasion. We were looking at critical thinking. We're looking at your ability to kind of, to see opinion. We're looking at your ability to do that because you're going to have to do this. Directing them, letting them know where they can use this. We looked at skimming today because tomorrow I'm going to give you a much longer text. I'm going to need you to be able to read that in a short amount of time. We looked at this today because next week you're doing this. So building it in, and also, and when you're outside the classroom, you're going to need it to do this and this and this. Building in these future uses, both inside and outside the classroom, I think gives it a real validity. Okay, and this question, what else did you practice, is key, because as David said, once you train students, they're going to get a lot better at this. And someone in the chat said, we're trying to develop critical thinking. Absolutely, because critical learners are going to learn faster, ultimately. If they are able to do what we're asking them to do, it's one of the bases of the lexical approach, isn't it? This idea of noticing, but students don't notice. That's why there's a whole sort of theory on it, that they only notice if you've encouraged them to pay attention to these things. So go back to our collocations. They only know to look for collocations if we said, hey, look, this is a collocation. These two words often go together. Can you find any other words that you frequently see together? Maybe keep a little diary of which words go together, and where did you find them? There might be a theme there. So when we're starting to build our own vocab notebooks, which I know some of us have probably encouraged students to do in the past, this is part of that. Students won't do it naturally. They might keep a notebook of every new word they've seen, which isn't very critical. We kind of need to go, well, are you ever really going to need this word, pig pen? Maybe not. Maybe that's one that you could kind of put away. Absolutely, because we want them to be autonomous. Most of my teaching career, I've taught students for 2 or 3 hours a day, maximum, in terms of the same students. I like to think I'm quite good at teaching, but there's no way that I'm going to get them to where they normally want to be with that amount of teaching. They need to be working outside of the class, and it doesn't need to feel like work. It doesn't need to be. I used to have some wonderfully dedicated students who I would see after class in the library, but their usage wasn't very effective. And I think possibly I had failed them because I hadn't given them the skills to be effective outside the classroom. As a new teacher, I definitely hadn't done. So I would say the things like, oh, you should read more, which is a great piece of advice, but it's a lot better if it comes with how.
Yeah, I did it for years. You should listen to BBC News. That will help you. How? Unless we give them the skills to do so. And I think that's, so we took this one article about Tim Berners-Lee, and yes, we did a prediction task. Yes, we did, we checked their comprehension. Yes, we looked at vocabulary in it, but we also developed their independent research skills. we also encourage them to, we also help them to analyze the text to see how the writer had linked the ideas. We also gave them the skills to critically analyze the text and decide what was fact and what was opinion. And we gave them time to think back over that. We gave them thinking and talking time to see what did we do and how does that apply to my future outside the class? Because as Mark said, and as I think was mentioned there, we need them to be learning independently. So we see texts as ways of preparing them to interact outside the classroom with texts.
And yeah, Paulina, absolutely. If you've got a topic that's kind of hit with the students, use it. I mean, while we've got raised interest, definitely let's utilize it.
And one way of doing that, I mean, you know, here we have a full article, but very often I'll have portions of an article because that creates a need to read more. As long as we've done our jobs engaging them with it, then we can send them home with the skills to continue reading. And that, again, as I said, autonomous students, that's our holy grail. So that's what we did with that text. What else can we do? So just wanted some other, to quickly show some other texts from the Textploitation book and what we did with them. This is one that we're constantly presenting texts in paper form to our students in a form that they have never used. You know, I'll often say that, you know, there was a skill that my father had that I don't have, and that's holding up a newspaper, and when it flops down, shaking it, and it miraculously is back up again. I can't do that because that's not what I read. I read on my phone, I read on my computer. So this lesson is, there is no text in the lesson. There are various texts about this topic, various articles about this topic online. And the lesson teaches students how to Google what they're interested in, how to find out more information, and how to sort of distill that down into something they want to talk about. So you don't always have to have a big text on paper. You can make use of the internet and hone the skill that they do in their own language and that they don't tend to do in English, which I think is quite nice. Sorry, Paulina, we got a question for Paulina. Go for it, Paulina. Put it in the chat window. Mark, do you want to talk about this one?
Yeah, so this is going back in a way to that idea of kind of cohesion, and that when we read, we tend to just quickly skim very often. Students don't want to skim. They won't do. If you give them a text, they will normally just read word for word until you get to halfway through and you go, oh, that's time up. And they go, well, I haven't finished. But you were told to skim. Like, yeah. We can make it much easier to skim by taking away the bits we don't want them to read. We can be just quite brutal. We can cut out the middle of paragraphs. We can identify the topic sentence, or in this case, I think I wrote topic sentences, and cut it down and give them the information. They will be able to see what the article is about without reading all of it. They don't need it all, but they will instinctively want it all. Okay. And so if we present it all, they'll probably read it, or at least a lot of them will. By doing this and saying, so you kind of know what the paragraphs are about. Yeah. Okay, well, this was a skimming activity. That's what we were developing. We were developing skimming skills by only giving you some of it.
I think very often they just don't believe that it's good. The number of exam classes I've taught where they're like, I need to improve my reading speed. I can't read in the time you give me. Say, absolutely fantastic. Here's the strategy. Off you go, do the strategy. After the activity, did you do the strategy? No, I read it word for word. Did you finish the article? No, I did not finish the article. So this idea, this lesson, they don't get a full text.
I mean, this is written primarily aimed at IELTS students, because I think a colleague and I once worked out that to get the answers in an average IELTS paper, you need about 40% of the text. That's all you normally need. If you can scan and you can skim, you can do it. And this is demonstrating how, basically, particularly if you've done the surveying of the text and you've looked at what's in there. So if you've kind of surveyed ahead and gone, oh, okay, it's the paragraph matching tasks, great. You kind of know where to find that most of the time. There might be one tricky one that's hiding somewhere. but in general, they're pretty, because they're looking to test a skill, we should be able to teach towards that skill.
And even in outside of exam techniques, I mean, what this lesson leads to is a discussion about this article, because I don't know about you, but I rarely read entire articles in their entirety. I don't do that. I have a quick look, I scan down it, I'm like, yeah, I got most of that, that's fine. I use my background knowledge to fill in some of the gaps, and off I go about my day telling people about an article I read.
Using those paraphrasing skills that we mentioned right at the top.
So this is a real life skill. People need to be able to read articles quickly while they're, you know, going down the street. Paulina, you guys are talking about there, you know, students with not much time, they're working really hard, they do have homework, but we still want them to be doing something worthwhile. We still want them to be engaging with real texts in their target language. So how can we do that? We need to make it not work, make it not time consuming, make it not a chore. So we need to give them the skills to do it on their phone, to do it on the go, so that they enjoy it.
I think we need to differentiate as well here between reading for pleasure and kind of reading to a purpose. And I think all of us, or many of us who get into kind of language teaching, we like books, we love literature. And there's been a tendency to presume that our students feel the same way. And the reality is a lot of them really don't. Their idea of fun is not to go and pick up kind of a book and go and sit idyllically under a tree with butterflies and a flower meadow. That's not really what they want to do. It's not what David wants to do, actually.
Not what I want to do.
That's more me. But I think this imposing, and I think this applies across teaching it as a whole, that there tends to be a humanities approach, because most of us that teach English certainly did humanities degrees applied. That's not how the students I teach that study maths want to read. So whilst we're always going to have those students that love to read, this shouldn't impact their ability to enjoy a book, because it's not the same skill. We're looking here, yeah, but if you have to read something quickly, then that's there. This is for the students for whom reading is not a pleasurable, fun activity. It's something to get done. And let's be honest, all of us, even no matter how much we love the subject we're doing, there are times where we have to find information. We have to be able to access it quickly to get something done, not to read it in a kind of an enjoyable way, just because we need the information. And these are the skills that we use when those cases occur.
Very true. This one now, so this is I love this. This is a lesson I wrote many years ago for kind of quite low levels, even though it's arguably a tricky article. And I did a standard kind of lesson that we would expect. So I assessed comprehension by asking them to discuss a summary. I looked at 5 topic words within it that you might use to summarize the story.
Building a little lexical set.
Yeah, I looked at a nice vocab matching bit in it, and I got them talking about it. Very kind of standard lesson. But the reason I did this lesson was because I was asking my students to read outside the class. There was a free newspaper every day on the tube on the way into school in London, and I was asking them to read in it, and they never did. And I got a bit annoyed. I was like, guys, come on, you say you want to improve your English, you got to be doing the stuff outside class. What's the problem? And they said, we can't do it. We don't understand it. We just can't do it. And so I wrote this lesson. I took them through it. And at the end, after the discussion, I said, right, how did you get on there? Were you able to talk about the article? Did you understand the article? And they said, yes. And I said, right. And then I gave them this. And I got them to put in order the steps of my lesson. And we talked about why I did each step, and how, as a teacher, we're not crazy. We're not just throwing in prediction tasks and looking at pictures for the hell of it. We're doing that to mirror how they should be engaging with articles outside. Because what students tend to do, read the title, don't understand it, walk away. Read the first paragraph, don't understand it, walk away. So this gave them it took a lesson and showed them the meaning of the lesson. And that's this kind of this overt approach to teaching I'm talking about. There's no use doing loads and loads and loads of prediction activities if our students aren't any better. So yeah, this is this kind of this making what we do overt, opening up the door on what we do and helping them see why we do it so they can apply it outside. A question there about the books. Just to let you know about the book is divided into 4 different text types. So articles is one, short stories, dialogues, and what we call tiny texts. And you have all levels within each of these. So I think it's 5 lessons within each of the text types. You have the answers, but along with the answers, you have teaching tips. So we don't expect maybe, you know, a new teacher to be able to do all of these kind of exploitation activities by yourself immediately. So we tell you why we're doing it, how to do it, and some tips so that you can apply it to your own teaching. I mean,
at the end of each unit, we've got a kind of a how-to guide as well, because we do want people to go and do these activities themselves. It's great if you buy the book, that's lovely, but actually really, we didn't start off writing these lessons with the aim of writing a book. It was about we're examining the practices that we saw and how to make them kind of better. That was what we wanted to lead to. And I think when we started, it was very much, I think the first talk we did was within EC. It was a local talk aimed at our peers to see if we couldn't improve what we were seeing observed. So it is very much about teacher development. That's the aim of the activities, really. Yes, we wanted to make great lessons, but along with those great lessons, there is the opportunity to actually do some sort of CPD development for teachers as well.
It's that dual objective with all of our lessons. Yeah. It was, we want to train our students to be able to interact with text outside the classroom, and we want to train teachers to be better able to exploit. Because how did we as teachers learn to pull grammar and vocabulary from a text? We learned because course books showed us how. You know, yes, we did our teacher training courses, but we then went in and learned how to teach grammar by doing grammar exercises, how to pull vocabulary out by doing that, how to check comprehension in sort of narrow true false things because of course books. The idea is that here you're being showed gradually how to exploit text further, and all of the activities can be applied with some rejigging to a different text, different article, different level as well. So yeah, what we wanted to kind of finish off with, but hopefully we have time for a couple of questions, but we wanted to just finish off with was, based on what you've kind of saw, you said at the beginning the things you tend to do with text. There was some lovely idea about paraphrasing and stuff, but a lot of it was vocabulary based and some grammar based. Is there anything that you guys would now like to try? So in your next articles lesson, is there anything from the talk you'd like to try? Feel free to chat in the window. And if you also have any questions that you would like to ask us, feel free to pop them in the window now. We'd love to hear from you. While you're thinking, we do have obviously our book, which is out there, our Delta book. We also have this blog. It's all called Textploitation. So while you've seen some of the activities from the book, there are also further ones on the blog, and we're constantly updating it, not just with lessons, but with teaching tips, especially given the current world, global climate we live in. So there's a lot of how to do this online, and there's some things on there about what we've mentioned, like overt teaching. So if you'd like to know more about that.
And I think there are now well over 100 lessons on the blog, and you can search via level as well, which is handy, or search by topic, because although we might have given a level, as David said, I think a lot of the activities are applicable across the board, because particularly if you're developing skills, as long as you're overt about why, I think, you know, a lesson that's harder can be there. Oh, this is a nice question from Polina. Sorry, I've just lost it. It's just scrolled up. Let me come back to that. You got it.
What will be basic activities to work with dialogues? You mentioned that as one of the type of text in the book. We do love a dialogue.
So much.
Actually, we're speaking at IATEFL this June about this very thing, are we not?
Yeah, we are. Need to write that.
But I mean, some basic activities, and Mark, maybe, you know, add to this as well. One of the things we're really interested in is speaking skills and breaking down common conversations into the kind of script of it. So, you know, not just giving students vocabulary, but giving them the what they should expect, what the back and forth they should expect in a script. For example, planning a night out, you expect certain things to happen. We also love to look at connected speech and language chunks. Someone mentioned language chunks earlier. We love to look at, I really love to look at text message conversations, because I love this idea of written spoken English. I think it's beautiful how we've taken spoken English and brought it into text messages. And I think we really see from our students in these kind of informal texting and emailing, we see the register is all off. You know, it's very overly formal.
As you got to that, because I was about to say register. Register is an amazing way of working out the relationship between people. And very often, as David said, register is where students tend to go a little bit awry when they communicate in a different medium. So most students are pretty good in a classroom situation because they've kind of established that. But I'm sure as teachers, we've all had communication with students that has been either extremely super formal or just inappropriately not formal, the other end, or sometimes a beautiful mixture of both within the same sentence.
Usually that, yeah.
So examining, how do you know they're friends? Oh, well, they use this word. Okay, so because I think too often we see register as a black and white, it's formal, it's informal. But if I'm communicating with my mom, it's informal. And in English, remember, register is very much a product of vocabulary, not grammar, as it is in many languages. So when we're looking at it here, what are these small differences? And again, we go back to this lovely idea of connotative values of words. Well, this is the type of word that you would use in this context, but used here, it's kind of a little awkward. It maybe is a little bit standoffish. So I think they're close, but maybe there's a respectful relationship, or I think here they're just best friends. You know, you can kind of see, and conversations are wonderful for that. So when we're looking at gist questions or things like that, that's the type of question that I want to ask, rather than what did they actually say, because I can test that a different way with paraphrasing.
And there's also, we do a lot, I mentioned connected speech, but we also look at intonation quite a lot.
Discourse markers.
Yeah, you know, omitted language that we commonly omit. That's one I really like to look at, is sort of auxiliary verbs that we tend to omit when speaking, and helping students to, because it's not all about speaking skills, it's about listening skills as well. So helping them to understand conversations by knowing what words will be linked and what words tend to be omitted.
Yeah.
But yes, lots of ideas in the book and on the blog. So hopefully, someone asked about an ebook. There is no ebook at the moment. A digital version of the book, no, but I think that would be a really good idea. I think that would be cool. That would be good. We'll mention it to Delta. But yes, hopefully some nice ideas there. And if you do have any further questions, if you'd like to chat to us, our emails are there. We're always happy to discuss this sort of stuff. We love it.
Yep, we are that boring.
Thank you, everybody. Paulina's asked about our English accents.
So
I'm from Ireland.
Yeah, your English accent is definitely Irish. Mine is sort of, I would say, boring, sort of neutral, faux BBC. I don't really come from anywhere. I'm one of those people that Theresa May hated, the stateless. My family moved around quite a lot when I was young, and then I went to a school that that sort of beat any sense of regional accent out of me. So I ended up with this.
Generic English.
Southerners think I'm Northern, Northerners think I'm Southern. So I don't really fit anywhere.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you very much, David and Mark. I was myself taking notes, and I've got a lot of practical ideas and food for thought. Thank you very, very much. Thank you. Yeah. So, as promised, today you also have a chance to talk to Michelle Jagger. She's the ELT consultant at Delta Publishing. Yeah, so Michelle, maybe,
yeah, thanks, Galina. Thanks, David and Mark. It was great. Thank you very much. I've made a note of the digital request. And
public pressure, it works, not just in football.
And yeah, thanks so much. I'm here to answer any questions you have on other Delta publications. You came through the virtual stand to begin with, and you might have seen some titles that you don't know or want to find more out about. So feel free to ask me. David and Mark, you can stay on the line if you'd like to, or if anyone has any specific questions on Textploitation, I think they've already been asked, but you're more than welcome to stay, or you might have to go off to your next.
I've got to run to my next.
Yeah, no worries, no worries.
I'm teaching.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. Just to let everybody know, we are running another online seminar with David and Mark for Delta Publishing next week with a slightly different twist. So if you're interested, have a look in our website. So thank you very much, both of you.
You're very welcome. Thank you everyone for attending.
Bye.
It was lovely to see you all.
Bye. Lovely. Great. So by all means, it's going to probably be a smaller group, but you can switch on your cameras. Lovely comments. Thank you so much for attending, and that you really enjoyed the talk from David and Mark. We're really, really happy from Delta to support Onara and to support teachers in Russia and to get to know you better. So it's a really good opportunity now as well. So feel free to interact as you would like to. Open. I don't think we're recording anymore, are we, Galina? No.
I will stop recording.
Yeah, I don't think this won't be put on the website. This is something that's sort of like a little consultation. So if you have any feedback or anything you'd like to ask me or Galina, this is the